book, I'm looking at page 112, where they talk about the family life. Women, as I've already mentioned, Plato was an exception, but women were expected to stay at home. They often were married at 14 or 15. They were generally not educated, not given any formal education. They they were expected to stay at home and out of sight, similar to what we find in the Muslim world today. Now, the next thing down is male homosexuality was a prominent feature, and it was a type of homosexuality we still have not legalized in the Western world, with mostly men and young boys. And this was accepted as being the norm. Socrates believed it was wrong and tried to fight it in himself. Some of your other philosophers did not seem to be bothered by it or to care. But this was a huge feature in the Greek family life. Most of your men were what we might today call bisexual. They were married, and particularly the aristocrats had to marry and have children in order to carry on the family name, in order to keep up the estate. And then they had oftentimes some favorite boy on the side. I mean, I don't want to say anything more about this, but it is a factor in Greek politics. All right, we have to move on. The Greeks could not unite themselves. And finally, an outsider named Philip of Macedon did for them what they could not do for themselves. Philip united them, conquered all the Greek city-states. Now, if you look at more detail, you'll find out he did not conquer Sparta because Sparta refused to open their gates to him, so he just left them alone. They were not, at this point, worth being bothered with. And Alexander, his son, did the same thing. Anyway, Philip conquered Greece, and Philip then turned his eyes toward Persia, intending to take over Persia. However, just before the start of his Persian campaign, he was assassinated. And he left the throne to his 20-year-old son, Alexander. Nobody believed Alexander to be capable of carrying on his father's footsteps, but they were wrong. So immediately Greece revolted. Alexander moved very swiftly and destroyed all hint of rebellion among the Greeks. The city of Thebes, for instance, which was at this point a leader among the Greek city-states, Alexander killed every man in the city, burned the city to the ground, destroyed it, and the rest of the city-states, except for Sparta, all lined up and said, we'll go along with you. So there was no more rebellion from the Greeks after that. Then Alexander the Great whom I've mentioned several times. Alexander then turned his attention toward Persia, and he conducted a campaign against the Persian king, by this time led by Darius III. Now, Darius III was no match for Alexander, and eventually Darius was killed by one of his own men. I mean, I'm covering a lot of ground pretty fast here. Alexander crossed over into what is today Turkey. They call it Asia Minor. Met Darius. Now, I had a Persian young man in one of my classes many years ago, and he said Darius III was the second greatest military leader in all of history. He just had the misfortune of being opposed by the greatest military leader in all of history. Darius tried. He got together a huge army, bigger than the army of any of the other Persian kings before him. He fought and fought. Now, when Alexander defeated Darius in Asia Minor and conquered Asia Minor, Alexander then proceeded down the western coast of what is today Israel, the eastern coast of the Mediterranean, or the western coast of Asia, but the eastern part of the Mediterranean, down into what is today Israel, and he met the Persians at a plain called Megiddo, otherwise known as Armageddon. Now, some of you, you'll hear that word Armageddon from time to time throughout your lifetime. The writer of the book of Revelation Bible said the last battle of the world will be fought here at Armageddon. Napoleon Bonaparte looked over the battlefield one time and said, wouldn't this make a dandy place to have a battle? Here's what's so great about Armageddon. I was there one time myself. There's hills on each side and basically a valley in the middle, and there's no room for flanking movements. Basically, it's the army meets the army head on. Well, Alexander arranged to where he put himself on the eastern side and Darius on the west. What this meant was that if Alexander lost, he would have to retreat into Persian territory. If Darius lost, he'd have to retreat toward Greek territory or Macedonian territory. You know, whoever lost the battle was going to have to run. Well, Alexander met head on. Again, no room for flanking movements, no room for any kind of strategy. It's just fight it out to the finish. Alexander won out. Now, Alexander the Great never lost a battle. And I will say this, Alexander eventually claimed that he was a son of Zeus, and he was not really the son of Philip, that Zeus was his father. I do have a documentary that goes into some more detail about that Philip once peeked in on his wife. His wife's name was Olympias, and Philip peeked in on her once and saw a big serpent slithering up to her bed. And Philip went to an oracle, to the oracle of Delphi, and inquired, what does this mean? The oracle said, you saw a god, therefore the eye that you used to look at the god will be put out. And within 2 years, that right eye that he peeked through the keyhole was put out in battle. And it also said, honor Zeus with all your might. Philip believed that Zeus was really Alexander's father, and that he really was not. But be that as it may, Alexander also had a habit of when he marched into battle, unlike the other generals who would let their troops march into battle first, and he would remain in the back somewhere at a safe distance, Alexander marched in the front with his army behind him. He was the first person to engage the enemy, and nobody alive could stand up to him. It's a small wonder he wasn't killed many a time over, but he survived every battle, came out on top. Anyway, he won at the Battle of Megiddo, and he went on down to face the Jews. The Jews opened up a book of Daniel the prophet, and they said, now here, this man lived 300 years before you, and he told us that you were going to come from Greece and that you were going to defeat the Persians. Alexander was so impressed with the Jews that he exempted them from worshiping him or his god Zeus and let them worship their own god. Alexander then went on to Egypt, conquered Egypt, went to an oracle of Egypt, and the oracle told him that everybody who had killed Philip was dead, but don't worry, Philip is not your father, and he was not your father anyway. Your father is Zeus. So Alexander took the title of Pharaoh and called himself Zeus Antipater. All this you can find a little bit of research. Then Alexander proceeded on, and he kept on going farther and farther eastward, conquering much of the known world. He got all the way to India, as you've already mentioned. There in India, he finally was wounded one time in battle, supposedly by an arrow. But after that, his troops simply refused to march on. Alexander returned home, or started to return home. But on the way, he took sick in the city of Babylon, and he died in Babylon. Folks, what I'm about to say is a little bit of trivia. Don't worry about it for a test. But he died on June 10th, which happens to be my birthday, but that's another issue entirely. But he died on the 10th of June. Alexander's body has never been found. We have found the body of his father, Philip, buried in a big mound, and we went in, and there was his death mask. I don't think there was anything left of Philip's body, but we haven't found Alexander's body. Anyway, supposedly Alexander's body made it to the city of Alexandria. When everywhere Alexander went, he started a city. Usually he'd name it Alexandria. Alexandria, Egypt, was destined to become one of Egypt's bigger cities. But there is one town along the way that he named Bucephala after his horse Bucephalus. That's not on the map, so don't worry about it. He did name one town after his horse, but otherwise he named the towns. But the one in Egypt, Alexandria, was destined to become one of the Roman Empire's greatest cities. All right. When Alexander died, his kingdom was divided into 4 kingdoms. The 2 I want you to remember. The Seleucids ruled Syria. And in the south, the Ptolemies. Let me put a Ptolemy. And his descendants ruled Egypt. Now keep the Ptolemies in mind, because the Ptolemies produced, the last Ptolemy was a woman named Cleopatra who married Julius Caesar. Alexander eventually finally married himself, had a son, but his son was killed, and 4 of his generals wound up taking over the empire. And this led to the period of time called the Hellenistic period, where the Alexander tried to spread Greek culture or Hellenistic culture all the way into all the kingdoms he conquered. Your book mentions Chandragupta-Maurya, whom I've already mentioned. No, he'll not be on the next test, but we talked about him before. Asoka also was an offshoot from Alexander and his empire. The Hellenistic world featured, again, a lot of trade, and the Greeks began to learn more about the world around them, and India was brought more, you might say, more into the fold. Persia and all these countries, all this was to pave the way for a union that to the Western world under Rome eventually. In other words, to have a unity, you have to have the same culture, and Alexander gave that somewhat. During the Hellenistic world, women began to exert themselves, or they were allowed more freedom than they were under Greek culture. The queens, for instance, became more important, and women began to be elevated somewhat. Actually, your book spends 2 or 3 pages talking about the women and their and various women, but I'm not going to spend that much time on it. I am going to spend some time, though, on talking a little bit about science. Euclid, and this is a name you must remember, is credited with established geometry. Now, if you cannot study plane geometry without studying Euclid. He figured out that the sum total of all triangles is 180 degrees. Again, he worked with parallelograms. Hopefully most of you know what I'm talking about when I say parallelograms. That's where the lines of your figure are parallel. He worked with squares, rhombuses, trapezoids, ellipses. Again, features you'll see in your geometry class. And some people have said that Euclid learned a lot from the Egyptians. Now, they did make, at one point, one of the Greek inventors built a little steam engine, but it didn't turn wheels like we think of our steam engine doing. The purpose of the steam engine was to open and close doors automatically. And it made the priest look like he was God, because he would raise his hand and the door behind him would open. He would lower his hand, the door would close, and this made the people more fearful of him. But now we know that steam was piped into the doorway, and a hydraulic system would open and close the doors as the steam came in. But they did develop a crude steam engine, but it did not lead to the development of technology. Now, the Greeks also debated the size of the sun. In other words, some people believed the sun was no more than about 1 foot or 2 in diameter, or just not much bigger than a chariot. Apollo drove his chariot across the sky, and the chariot was a blazing chariot, and that was the sun. But finally, one Greek used mathematics to figure out, said, I believe the sun is at least 100 miles in diameter. Again, that's the best he could do without the telescope. He was criticized severely for his belief. But some Greeks began to believe that the earth went around the sun rather than the sun going around the earth. And one Greek philosopher even said the sun itself goes around another big ball of fire. These ideas were not accepted at the time, but later we wish they had been, that science might have been a lot better off if they had. But they would debate the motions of the planets. They would debate, among other things, whether or not there is a God. Now, I've already mentioned Epicureanism and Stoicism, so I don't want to mention them again. But I do want to mention the religions of the ancient world, particularly the mystery religion. All right. Actually, I better start at the beginning. At the beginning, the Greeks worshipped the Olympian deities, the gods who lived on Mount Olympus, of which Zeus was the main one. And also there was Athena, Ares, Venus, or Aphrodite. The Greeks called her Aphrodite. Kronos, otherwise known as Saturn. Poseidon, otherwise known as Neptune. I mean, the Greeks gave one name to these gods, the Romans gave another. Zeus in Roman mythology was Jupiter, and Athena, Minerva. Ares was Mars, Aphrodite, Venus, Kronos, Saturn. These were the gods who lived on Mount Olympus. Now, as time went on, the worship of these gods fell from favor, and their oracles fell to disuse. Now, I've already mentioned oracle. An oracle was a place where you could go if you had a question and supposedly get divine guidance from the gods. But I want to give you a couple of examples of how oracles answered your questions. For instance, the king Croesus once said to the oracle, he asked the oracle, should I go conquer or should I go to war against the Persians? The oracle said, if you go to war against the Persians, you'll destroy a great empire. He went to war against the Persians. The empire that was destroyed was his own empire. Philip of Macedon went to an oracle to inquire, should I go attack Persia? The oracle said, the bull is cast. The bull is ready for a sacrifice. Well, it turned out the bull that was ready for a sacrifice was him. He was the one who got sacrificed, or he was the one who got knifed down like a sacrificial bull. It's worse than our modern day weather forecast. I mean, just to give you an example, the forecast for tomorrow's weather is there is a possibility of snow tonight. I mean, hey, that's the best our weathermen can do, and they don't claim to be divine, but there might be snow tonight, unless there isn't. I mean, that's modern day. I mean, that's weather forecasting. Well, the oracles were even worse than that. But, folk, as time went on, the oracles simply stopped answering them, and the people stopped going to them. Now, the one man who got the most definite answer from an oracle was Alexander. I mean, we went to the oracle in Egypt, which he believed more reliable than the one in Greece. The one in Delphi. He went to one in Egypt, and he was told flat out, in plain, clear language, Philip is not your father is Zeus. Well, Philip did get an answer too when if the oracle told him you're going to lose your right eye, the eye you peeked through the people and saw Zeus coming in at your wife, one of your wives. But anyway, the oracles after a while seemed to stop answering, it seemed to stop working. The old Olympian gods fell to disfavor. In the place of the Olympian gods, there came the worship of Isis, which I've already mentioned. And folk, it seems like that word Isis keeps appearing up time and time and time again throughout history in one form or another. And yes, ISIS is making news right now, as I think all of you should know. All right, but anyway, now to the mystery religions. Essentially, the mystery religions offered an emotional experience, something the Olympian religions had not had, and they offered a feeling of belonging or joining. In other words, you had to join up with them. According to the mystery religions, there had been a great Savior God who had died, and by you uniting with this dead Savior God who had died and resurrected, you could achieve happiness, achieve fulfillment, and even achieve a happy afterlife. Now, if you think like this sounds like Christianity, a lot of commentators will say the same thing, that the mystery religions, they say, gave rise to Christianity. However, folk, there were two big differences between the mystery religion and Christianity. And one is, Christianity had no secrets or no mysteries. Now, that was to change in some circles later, but essentially, any Christian was supposed to be able to tell anybody else what he believed and why. So they didn't have any secret initiations or secret rituals. And the other thing about the mystery religions that was different from Christianity is the mystery religions only invited the most successful people to join, mostly men. It reminds you of the modern day Masons. In other words, don't you ask to join us. If we want you, we'll come and get you. And they would only ask the most successful to join. Christianity says we'll take in the thief, the poor, the crippled, the maimed, the unsuccessful, even the prostitute, male and female alike. We'll take in anybody who's willing. Just come in. Again, the mystery religions did not do so. It was we only take in the best. And they pride themselves on, we got this man in our group, and look how successful he is. No, oh, but we got this man in our group. Again, Christianity did not do this. So that's two very big differences. I think I might ought to write that down. Two differences, no secrets, no mysteries. And Christianity took in anyone who wanted to join. Something the mystery religions would not do. Anyway, your book pronounces that woman's name Isis, or Isis, was one of the most popular of the mystery religions. All right, folks, with that, I'm going to leave chapter 4, and I'm about 40 minutes late, and turn to the next chapter, Rome. Your book incorporates a section. This chapter 5 is not just Rome, it's actually Rome and China. So Rome and China under the Han will be on the next test because, again, this is the only world history book I've seen that puts them together, but I see why they want to compare them. All right, anyway, Rome. Now, according to ancient tradition, Rome was founded in the year 753 BCE, and it was founded by two twin boys named Romulus and Remus. Now, right here nearby, there's a city in Georgia called Rome, and if you visit Rome, Georgia, you will find a statue made of bronze, I believe, or maybe made of copper, a statue of two twin boys being nursed by a wolf. Have any of you ever seen the statue by any chance at all? None of you? Okay, well, it's there, at least it was there the last time I visited Rome. According to the story, and folk, this is not completely implausible because there have been about 50 documented cases of babies who were thrown out by their parents, who were found by wolves and reared up by wolves. According to the story, Romulus and Remus were twins whose parents found some reason to not want them, threw them out in the wild, and a wolf found them, and these boys were brought up among the wolves. And they grew up among the wolves, and eventually they went to this place where there were 7 hills, and there they founded a city. Romulus unfortunately killed Remus, so Romulus became the city was named Romulus after Rome, and the city was named Rome after Romulus. Rome. And Remus died without any posterity. Now, Rome is called, among other things, the Eternal City, or the City of 7 Hills, because it's located on 7 hills. It's located along the Tiber River, like so many of those other civilizations located on the banks of rivers. However, it's 50 miles inland. There is believed to have been two reasons for this. Number one, 50 miles inland would make the city of Rome safe from a tidal wave, which apparently was a big problem they had in those times. Huge tidal waves would come in and smack a city and take the whole city away. And also, it made it more difficult for pirates. Pirates were afraid to go up 50 miles up a river because they could always find, once they got in a river, a big navy could come to the mouth of the river and just close them off and seal them off. And let's face it, people who pirate other people are generally cowards. They'll stand up to you when they know they outnumber you, but get a trained army after them and they'll turn and run like crazy. These pirates were afraid to go up the Tiber River 50 miles up. So Rome, the 50-mile distance made it safe for them. Now, Rome is located near the center of the Italian peninsula, the western side of the center. Unlike Greece, Italy's mountains are more gentle. No, Greece's mountains were, I'm exaggerating, really harsh and hard to climb. Rome's mountains were just rolling, even hills, which made it easier to unite the city, made it easier to build roads. According to their own history, Rome started out with 7 kings. Now, until the rise of modern criticism, we never questioned those kings, but then came modern criticism, and one historian named Gibbon 200 years ago said, I doubt that any of these 7 kings existed. Well, time went on, we have more documents and more data today. Today we know, at least, according to the authors, the last 3 of these kings existed. So Rome, at least, apparently started out with kings. The first Roman inhabitants were the Etruscans. Eventually, the Etruscans gave way to the Latins, and the Latin became the language of the Roman Empire and was to remain so until the day the Roman Empire fell. Now, anyway, Rome apparently was under control of the Etruscans during the last part of its history under the kingdoms, but eventually Rome gave way to a republic. They went from monarchy, as was the case of a lot of its Greek city-states, to a republic, which is close to being a democracy. Now, what we're going to find, folk, the same thing the Greeks found. These democracies had a way of coming to an end. The Roman Republic was no exception. Now, Rome eventually, without even asking to, you might say without even wanting to, became the master of all of Italy. The way they did it, they went to war with another city-state one time and they won it. But when they won, they built a road from their city to the city they conquered. And they said to the city conquered, you be our ally. We will in turn protect you if anyone attacks you. And in turn, if we're attacked, we expect you to come and protect us. You are welcome to marry your sons, are welcome to marry our daughters. And we'll give our daughters to your sons in marriage. We want to become one with you. Then those 2 cities got together and they conquered another city. And then Rome built a road. But after a while, here Rome was conquering cities and building roads to the cities they conquered, and it led to a famous saying, all roads lead to Rome. And some of these roads that they built, folk, are still in use to this day. The book shows a picture of one on page 127. But they were such good roads, and roads enabled them to to roll carts along, and that way they could carry a whole lot more goods than they otherwise could, which facilitated trade and increased the wealth of both the conquered city and Rome. And every city that joined up with Rome became richer and richer. And Rome continued to do this until after a while they had all of Italy. So now Rome had all of Italy, but over the horizon was another big area that was building itself up called Carthage. Now, Carthage apparently had been founded by the Phoenicians And if you look on a map, Carthage is almost right straight south of Rome, right across the Mediterranean. So as Carthage was building up its empire that was to include for a time Greece and Asia Minor, and Rome was building up its, if you look on the map on page 129, well, you can see that Rome had a much, much bigger area than Carthage did. But anyway, the conflict between them led to 3 big wars. These wars are known as the Punic Wars. These 3 wars are called the Punic Wars. The Punic Wars lasted more than 100 years. They consisted of 3 wars. 3 wars. Now, here is where Rome, it was one thing for them to unite all of Italy, but here was where Rome met a people whom they could not placate and could not make peace with. I mean, it was one thing to make peace with people who believed in the same gods you believed in, who spoke the same language you did, who had the same philosophies you had. Yeah, you could make peace with those people and get them on your side. In the case of Carthage, they worshipped a whole different set of gods, had a different set of philosophies, and basically they simply refused to quit fighting. Now, both sides claimed the little island of Sicily. If you look on a map, it looks like Italy is a high-heeled woman's boot, and it has been said that Italy is kicking Sicily. Anyway, both sides claimed Sicily. They went to war over Sicily. The first war was won by Rome. Well, the city of Carthage did not sit back and take that. So after a while, they felt strong enough to fight again. This time it was over Spain, among other places, other issues. But the second war featured one of the greatest military men of all time named Hannibal. Hannibal did not attack Italy directly. Now, here's what Hannibal knew from the beginning. He knew that he was fighting probably a losing fight, but he figured that perhaps if he could fight long enough, Rome would eventually quit and see things their way. In other words, it's a case of a small man fighting against a big empire. And they used sneak tactics, guerrilla tactics. Well, Hannibal went into Italy by going through Spain first, and then from there he crossed the Alps, and you can see the invasion route in the map on page 129. Crossed the Alps and went down into Italy, and for 20 years he would avoid a battle against a major Roman army or a major conclusive battle. He would hit the smaller cities where they knew that the ones he knew were not being well protected. He had a knack for finding the unprotected cities and hitting them and sacking them, carrying off their wealth. Then he'd hit again at some unprotected city without ever invading the larger cities. He did fight one big battle of Cunae. Yeah, I'll go into some detail here. Now, let me see if I can draw it. At the Battle of Cunae, Hannibal told his center, now when they attack you, I want you to just simply step back. Everybody step back a step or two. And as they plunge forward, you step back. So here's what eventually happened. I mean, at first the battle might have looked something like this, but then the Hannibal's men, the center kept stepping back while the wings remained stationary. And again, the Romans were not really aware of what was going on. Well, as time went on, as the center kept going farther back, the wings remained stationary. Eventually, Hannibal's flanks closed in and completely encircled the Roman army. And if, again, from what you remember about what I've told you, in those days, soldiers did not wear any protective equipment on their backs. Everything was in front. The idea was you have to keep the enemy in front. If you turn around, you can get killed. So it can encourage men not turn around, to say the least. But these men found themselves being hit from in front and behind. And the Roman army was completely routed. Hannibal and his men went in bushel baskets after the battle and collected all the jewelry and gold and valuable weapons, everything of value they could find. Battle of Cunei, great victory for Hannibal. Well, this was to go on for 20 years. Eventually, a Roman general decided, well, I've got to fight him on his own terms. He has come to our territory. I'm going to his. So he went down to Carthage, where he knew Carthage was not very well defended. And once at Carthage, Hannibal was forced to leave Italy and go to Carthage himself to defend Carthage. But then in that wide open plain of North Africa, there was no room for flanking maneuvers, no room for strategy. Again, it was similar to Armageddon, except just the opposite, where Armageddon had hills that kept you from flanking. Well, there was room for flanking maneuvers, but they didn't seem to do Hannibal any good. Hannibal's army was greatly outnumbered. Hannibal was great for using elephants, but Scipio and his men had figured out what to do with the elephants. They did the unthinkable. I mean, when the elephants charged at them, the men simply broke ranks, something they were not normally supposed to do. But Hannibal said, when the enemy charges at you, just simply break ranks, form a pathway, and as the elephants go to your rear, kill the rider. So they broke the ranks. The elephants went into their ranks without hurting anybody on the Roman side. The elephant riders were all killed, and the elephants then went harmlessly to the rear, and without riders, the elephants had no idea what to do. So the elephant charge was quickly neutralized, and Hannibal was counting on the elephant charge to have a lot more effect against the Romans than it actually proved to have. Hannibal was forced to surrender. He was sent deep into Africa into exile. He eventually escaped exile and went into Asia Minor and Greece to try to rally the people against the Romans. He failed. All right, that was the Second Punic War. 50 years went by. And finally, the city of Carthage revolted again. Again, these were people you could not make peace with. The Romans finally decided to deal decisively with them. They went into the city of Carthage, completely destroyed it, plowed up the ground, and then put salt in the ground, and then watered the ground to where the salt would mix in with the dirt to guarantee that no crops would be grown there again. Now, eventually the city was rebuilt, but basically the city was, for all practical purposes, permanently destroyed. Now, folk, I want to inject something here that's very modern. You might think all of this is ancient history, or this part of it is ancient history. But sometimes you find yourself fighting against an enemy that will simply not quit fighting. And even though they don't really have a chance to win, they're going to keep coming at you and coming at you and coming at you and coming at you. The only thing that finally got the war stopped was when all the city of Carthage was enslaved and their ground destroyed to where it would not be productive again for many years, and the city burned with fire. Only then did the people of Carthage stop fighting. When I was preparing for a master's degree, one of the 12 books I had to read was a book about the Punic Wars, and it said that the city of Carthage, the religion of Carthage involved a whole lot of witchcraft, mind control, and priesthood. In other words, basically trying to get mass mind control by using magic to get people to think their way. This was something that Roman religion did not have. So, folks, the victory of Rome over Carthage might have been a big victory for Western civilization, in that the Roman religion, which in my mind anyway was better than the Carthage religion, the Roman religion wound up winning. Then Carthage took a back seat. If Carthage had won, there's a chance that Western Europe might still be in the Dark Ages, and the world would not have airplanes, radios, computers, because nobody else would step forward and invent these things. As it was, Rome won, and yes, Rome went through a period called the Dark Ages. Western Europe went through a period called the Dark Ages, but nevertheless, they did not fall into the trap of where that witchcraft was the official religion, and mind control and mass control, priest-ridden society became the norm. And religious freedom then would have taken a complete back seat. In general, Rome allowed religious freedom, even though it is true they persecuted two types of people, the Druids and the Christians. The persecution of Christians eventually stopped. The Druids were driven underground. But again, this was a case in the past where that you fought against people who simply would not quit fighting until you really, really, really dealt a very hard, final, decisive blow to them. And then they finally quit. If any of you have any comments, you're welcome. I mean, any ideas? Most of you probably have not thought of it this way, but I've had years to think of it. What if somehow Carthage had won? I think the results would have been disastrous for Western civilization. Well, now, as Rome conquered Carthage and defeated it, took 100 years, Rome was also taking over the whole Mediterranean world. They eventually conquered Greece. And they went on into Asia Minor and conquered Asia Minor. And they conquered much of Syria, destroying the Seleucid Empire that had been founded by... So they took over the Hellenistic world, and as they did so, they adopted a lot of Greek culture. Eventually, Rome took over all of the Mediterranean world, but that was after they had ceased to be a republic. Now, there came some really bad, ominous signs, though, along the way. You had a Roman general who, General Marius, when Marius recruited his army, he realized, hey, I can't recruit just Roman citizens like the other generals. I'm going to recruit anybody who will join, including barbarians, outsiders. Now, then he made a serious, what turned out to be a blunder. Now, folk, I joined the army one time, and when I joined, I put one hand on the Bible and raised my right hand toward heaven and swore to defend the United States of America. I did not swear an oath to Jimmy Carter, who was President of the United States at that time. No, I swore to the United States of America. Marius had the troops swear loyalty to him, not to the Roman Republic, not to the Roman Senate, but to him. In other words, you are following me, and you promised to swear to follow me to the ends of the earth. And this was to prove to be a huge mistake later. So basically, he was recruiting an army that was basically his. Well, this was to lead to, eventually, and I'm going to make a long story short. Well, or try to. During the wars, the Punic War, during the first wars, a Roman soldier would go out and fight against a city-state that might have been 100 miles away. When the war was over, he'd return and take over his farm again. But then during the Punic Wars, Roman soldiers finally had to go and fight sometimes as far away as Spain, in other words, and stay gone for years. And they'd sometimes come home and find that their wives had sold their property because they could not keep up with the state. Or the Roman soldier would come home crippled after having been wounded in battle, sick or crippled, or some days, sometimes not even return at all, he'd be dead. Problem was the rich got almost all the land, and your ordinary person was put out of business. This was a big problem for the Republic. And again, had they had a king, perhaps this problem could have been solved. Well, into this scenario came two brothers, Tiberius and Gaius. Their last names were Gracchus. Let's see. Gracchus. Anyway, these two brothers, Tiberius being the oldest, Tiberius went before the Roman Senate and said, I think that we should take the lands from the rich that they have usurped from the poor and redistribute these lands back to the original owners. If you've read the assignment, you may know Tiberius was shortly afterward killed. Well, his younger brother then, Gaius, took up the same cause, and Gaius said, I think we should redistribute these lands that the rich have usurped and give them back to the owners to help the poor. The Romans proceeded to kill Gaius also. Now, folk, you can talk about how dirty politics is. we're going to find out that politics in Roman times was excruciatingly dirty. In other words, these men would be killed, assassinated openly. Now, I have to admit, last night I fell asleep listening to a YouTube video that said that Lyndon B. Johnson and John Edgar Hoover killed John F. Kennedy. I don't know how true it is, but I mean, if you don't know anything about the Kennedy assassination, it's highly controversial. If so, it makes American politics almost on the level of Roman politics, except for one thing. If Hoover and Johnson did the deed, they had to keep it hush-hush and cover up. The difference is, in Roman times, there was no hush-hush and cover up. They would do the dirty deed and then afterwards brag on it and get away with it. Now, we'll later learn that another Roman politician named Julius Caesar also was killed. Anyway, the Gracchus brothers were assassinated. Now, folks, history all the way from their time to this has made the Gracchus brothers martyrs and heroes. I want to go on record as saying they were courageous. I admire their courage. Their politics, if you haven't guessed already, I think their politics was simply wrong. What other ways could they have done? They should have just said, maybe we can make easy terms for these people, put these people to work doing something else, set up roads, bridges, aqueducts, or whatever to get these people employed, but don't just give them land, because this has never worked throughout history everywhere it's been tried. So the politics, it was liberal, socialistic, I think was wrong. The courage they had, the martyrdom, yes, I admire them for that. All right. The unrest eventually led to three men more or less taking over. These three men were called the Triumvirate. Problem on Rome being called the city. Rome is also called the Eternal City. Anyway, that's the first Triumvirate consisted of Crassus, Pompey, and Julius, otherwise known as Julius Caesar. Now, these three men eventually developed so much power that they controlled the Roman Senate and they controlled Roman politics. Crassus was the richest man in all of Rome, and he was eventually sent to fight in Asia Minor with his army. He was so rich he could, what these men were doing that we don't allow, each of these men were raising their own armies. I mean, what if we allowed Ted Turner to raise his army and every rich man in the country, Donald Trump to raise his army, and whoever else has enough money to do so to have their own armies? Eventually, these armies would start fighting each other, which is exactly what happened at that time. We only allow our governments to raise armies, our federal government and then the state governments. But anyway, Crassus was sent to Asia Minor. He lost his life in a battle. That left it between Pompey and Julius. Now, Julius, we know it was Julius Caesar, was sent to Gaul, which is today France. Julius Caesar conquered Gaul. He sent back a message to Rome. It consists of 3 Latin words, and if any of you can pronounce them, you're welcome to. Weenie, weedy, witchy, something like that. I hope I'm pronouncing. Anybody know?
I know what it is. I just can't remember.
It's, I came, I saw, I conquered. Yeah, I've had some students who can pronounce some, but and I regret to say I forget them. But it's something like weenie, weedy, witchy. The 3 words. I came, I saw. Is it somebody? Vini, vidi, vici. Okay. Anyway, I came, I saw, I conquered. He conquered Gaul. Now, Pompey began to fear Julius's power. Anyway, after Julius set himself up as ruler of Gaul, he started to come back to Rome, and he knew that Pompey, who was a former friend of his, would oppose him. So he told his men as they crossed every bridge, when the last man gets across this wooden bridge, I want all of you to turn around and burn the bridge behind you. And of this comes the expression, burn your bridges. Burn your bridges means we're not going to go back. We're going to either conquer or we're going to die. Now later when Cortez went to Mexico, he burned his ships, basically sending a message to men, you can't retreat, we're either going to conquer Mexico or we're going to die, one or the other. So see, Julius Caesar told me, we're going to win this thing or die trying. But Julius went toward Rome. The Roman Senate ordered Julius Caesar to lay down your arms and retire to private life. Julius Caesar answered basically with one word, no. So a clash between Julius Caesar and Pompey was inevitable. They fought. Julius Caesar, being a better general perhaps and a better manipulator, a better maneuver of the men, won. Pompey was killed. And the Roman Republic came to an end. Julius Caesar set himself up as dictator. Now, Julius Caesar knew that the people of Rome had a real hard I don't know what word to use, but they were really hard against the idea of kingship. So he tried to pretend that he was not a king. Even so, he used the term dictator instead. Now, by modern terms, dictator is almost worse than a king. But he set himself up as king, as dictator, and eventually called himself dictator for life. He married Cleopatra, who was the ruler of Egypt. Now, there was a movie made about this in the early 1960s called Cleopatra. Did you ever happen to watch it? Played by Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, they were the really popular heroes at the time. And I've heard the props have been left in the Egyptian desert. The film was filmed there in Egypt because it was just too expensive to load up the props and carry them away. So, and in the Egyptian desert, those props will last for hundreds of years, perhaps, in that dry ground. But anyway, Cleopatra married Julius Caesar. They had a son called Caesarion, who they believed was going to be the next ruler. And everything was going great for Julius Caesar. Now, folk, this story I'm about to tell you was once in this book, but it's since been taken out for whatever reason. But anyway, the Ides of March is another way of saying 15th of March. And I looked up some student, what's significant about the Ides of March? So I looked it up. The only thing significant about the Ides of March is Julius Caesar died on that date. Otherwise, it's not been a significant date in history. But essentially what happened, according to this is according to your authors in some of the older books that we used to use here. A blind soothsayer heard Julius Caesar's footsteps coming into the Senate chamber, and this soothsayer said, you, Julius Caesar, are going to die on the Ides of March. Caesar shrugged it off. Well, on the Ides of March, Julius Caesar happened to pass by this blind soothsayer and said, hey, it's the Ides of March, and I'm still here. And Zeus said, the Ides of March are not over with yet. Now, what Julius Caesar did not know was that about 20-some senators had conspired to get him, and they had agreed to put to put their daggers under their cloak, and from that comes the expression cloak and dagger. But they all wore daggers under their cloaks because, and there were no metal detectors. And everybody trusted the senators were going to would not come to the Senate chamber armed. So they all wore 20 of them, and they would all agree. Now, whichever way he's looking, you engage in a conversation with him. I mean, there's one man was assigned to engage in conversation with Julius Caesar. Now you stand to one side, you stand the other, and you get to his right, you get to his left. And the 3 men were assigned, or 5 or 6 men were assigned to each side of him, and some men were to get behind him. And one man, the leader, was to give a certain signal. And at a signal, they were all to pull their daggers out from under their cloaks and lunge at Julius Caesar. Okay, so about the time the assassins, they were all positioned where they planned to be. The leader gave the signal, and all 20 of them pulled their daggers out of their cloaks. Julius Caesar's friends were watching in horror. None of them were armed. Julius turned around and noticed Brutus was among the assassins. His words were "et tu, Brute," or no, "you too, Brutus." That were his last words, because he suffered something like 20 or more than 20 knife wounds that killed him. And supposedly this was going to end the dictatorship and be the beginning of the democracy once again. It didn't quite work out that way. Instead, because they had no means of which of which they had no means of succession. Now, I want to insert here, our Constitution is clear that when the president dies, the vice president automatically takes over. Well, what if the president and vice president both die at the same time? Well, the Speaker of the House takes charge. Then the president pro tem of the Senate. Then it goes through the cabinet. In other words, there's an order of succession. We know who takes charge when the leader dies. Well, in those days, there was no order of succession. A power struggle ensued. Cleopatra believed that Mark Antony would win, so she allied herself with Mark Antony. In the meantime, Octavia, Julius Caesar's adopted son. Now we know of Octavia as Caesar Augustus. They fought a war, a series of wars, in which Octavia won. Cleopatra, when she saw that Mark Antony could not win, she tried to ally herself with Caesar Augustus. She could not. Cleopatra then supposedly used a poisonous snake to kill herself because it was believed that the poisonous snake would make her into a god or a goddess. So she was the last of the Ptolemies. Octavia won. Octavia then assumed the title of ruler of Egypt, or Pharaoh, and called himself Caesar Augustus. And with that began probably a 200-year period of basically of Roman peace, a period called Pax Romana. The people of Rome were tired of civil wars and of wars in general, wars of conquest and civil wars, so they relaxed a bit. And for 200 years, there were very few wars that Rome fought. Octavia was to rule for 45 years, known as Caesar Augustus. Octavia tried to keep alive the myth that the Republic was still going on, so he called himself Princeps, or first among equals. He said, I'm just one equal with you, and he wouldn't sit at the head of the Senate. When the Senate would meet, he would sit somewhere among the other senators like he was one of them, but everybody knew he really was in charge. Princeps. And there were not very many political assassinations for several generations. Eventually it resumed again. And Caesar Augustus is the Caesar who was in charge when Jesus was born. He was born in the, I believe, the 30th year of Caesar Augustus. We'll talk more about that later. Anyway, we gave way to the empire. The Republic gave way to empire. And from now on, it's going to be the Roman Empire, not the Roman Republic. But I'm going to have to close it here now. I'm a little bit concerned, and it's my fault. I spent too much time talking about Greek philosophers, folk. Really. And of course, I didn't know how much time these tests were going to take. But